What's up, gifted family? Welcome to another episode of the show that is the GP YouTube. Just a reminder that if you support what we do here, make sure to go over to giftedperformance.com and sign up for our automated coaching service. For only $1 a day, you'll get access to 15 highly customized training programs, a macronutrient calculator, our meal planning feature that lets you build and save meals based on your macros, as well as access to our private Facebook group. All subscriptions help us in continuing to put out great content to get you to your fitness goals. Thanks for stopping by, and without any further delay, let's get into today's video. Enjoy.
All right, we are back with another episode of Coach's Corner, a familiar face and a new face to the YouTube channel. We've got Dr. Mike Taylor. Don't say anything. I'm going to come back to you. Right away. And the infamous Thomas Schenkel Neal Butler Esquire III, sipping on, what is that, a Diet Coke? Coke Zero? Cherry Diet Coke? Like the man. Coke Zero. Is Coke Zero better than Diet Coke?
It's different.
It is different.
I like to periodize my diet soda. Depends on the time.
All right. So today we are doing a little powerlifting Q&A podcast. But before we start with the powerlifting Q&A, I have my own question for Mike, and it's because Mike is a doctor. So as a doctor, Mike, how do I cure the coronavirus?
Oh, God. Should stay inside your house probably and wash your hands, I guess.
Some guy on the street told me that I should be tongue kissing homeless people. Is that a bad idea?
I mean, wasn't that kind of how the zombie so remember World War Z with Brad Pitt?
Yep. Yeah.
Wasn't that kind of the deal? Like they couldn't see you if you were tongue kissing strangers?
I think that was
totally
it.
ignored you.
Let me email Brad after this to get confirmation that was the underlying message, and I'll get back to you. But that's what I read into.
So where does
I'll also hang up and start watching World War Z right now? Yeah.
So I watched Contagion last night just to kind of get myself extra spooked. Oh man, so accurate, We're all done for. We're going full doomer today. All right, but let's get into some of these powerlifting-focused questions today. So the first question on our list comes from the one, the only, Charles Needham, or Needham. How do you say it? Does he need ham?
I think it's Needham.
Needham?
Yeah.
Not a deli meats guy? All right.
No.
So but Charles asks...
You don't need him.
You do. So Charles asks the importance of LTAD guidelines and how/why powerlifters don't follow them. So LTAD, long-term athlete development model, and the assumption that powerlifters don't follow them. So let me throw it to Thomas first. Let's address the second part of the question. Do you believe that powerlifters as a whole don't follow LTAD guidelines?
So I'm going to get on my boomer soapbox here. I think that the younger generation definitely does not. I think when I was coming up and getting started like 10, 15 years ago in powerlifting, or as an interest or potential interest, a lot of guys started out with conventional sports, broad base, your standard LTAD structure where they're exposing themselves to a wide variety of stuff. And by the time they've reached that early developmental age for the specific sport, they were lifting weights and they were building kind of broad capacity in the weight room. A lot of guys came from bodybuilding, myself included. That was my original interest. I just wanted to get jacked. And then powerlifting seemed like a sport that I could do where I could get jacked and where I wouldn't break collarbones like my rugby buddies did, all sorts of stuff like that. So, I think traditionally it's been fairly well adhered to. And I think that with the advent of Instagram and this is probably going to segue, well, I guess we are talking about the second half of the question, but the emergence of social media and the kind of cargo cult mentality that tends to come with that, where everybody gets on Instagram, they see their lifter that they aspire to be like doing something, and they don't think, why is he doing that? What brought him to doing that? What brought him to needing to do that? They just say, Dan Green or Brandon Lilly or, whoever the face is this month. Why is he doing that? It's just, I want to do that. So they do that. There's a lot of clout chasing, a lot of social aspect for why people do things now in the kind of social media universe that we live in. And so people tend to short circuit themselves. They'll go big. You see guys that have been lifting for like 6 months, taking heavy singles every day, or chasing like these super high specificity programs where they're only really doing 3 movements at various high intensities, at super high frequencies, and acting like, they're going to qualify for Tokyo in a sport that's not even in the Olympics, Mike. With your background kind of mimics some of that with how you got into the sport. I know we've talked about that, and I guess the bright side to all this is that powerlifting is a pretty simple sport, and it's developing a pretty narrow array of qualities. So there's a lot of opportunity for people that maybe skipped that early development to fucking stop it, go back to where they need to be to start, and build back up to where they ought to be, where they want to be. It's not like with a speed or power or stopwatch sport, or a sport that's got some sort of external timelines like football, where you have to play high school to play college to play professionally. You can kind of set your own developmental timeline. There's a lot of leeway in how the body develops those aspects, and it's not like if you're not at your peak by 16 or 18 years old, you've missed it. So that's the bright side. That's the good news.
Yeah, Mike, anything to add there?
No, I'd pretty much echo everything that he said. I mean, kind of speaking from my own experience, and probably similar experience for a lot of people who are like, when they're newer to powerlifting, probably got started maybe when they were not like necessarily young, like children, but like maybe like late teens, early 20s in a lot of cases. And so, I mean, in my case, late teens, early 20s, Mike was really only concerned with being as strong as I could be like at that moment. And like, I assumed it would all just kind of work out later, but like, obviously I need to, just go ham and get as strong as possible, like right away. And I did chase that, and it wasn't very sustainable for very long. And so now I think like, partially it might just be like kind of like where you are in your life. And also you don't have that, like Thomas was saying about how in other sports you have like set seasons, and it's kind of like there's a whole like social structure for like what your progression should be. Like with powerlifting, it's like, you go to the gym and maybe you lift weights to do this, or maybe you lift weights to be, more aesthetic looking or whatever. For me, I was just more concerned with the now and not planning. I just figured it would all come together, which, now I kind of have maybe a little bit more appreciation for, and that's not how things work. So it's maybe just a matter of kind of where you are at the time that you get started, like mentally, I guess.
Yeah. And Thomas, you mentioned, you brought up some good points about like the kind of why people are so specific with their like heavy singles every day. Do you think that that's driven mostly by kind of like the Instagram culture? Do you think that's driven by the hyper specificity of the sport? Do you think it's driven by ego lifting? What do you think drives that kind of mentality there?
Oh man, I think it's super multifactorial. I mean, you said we mentioned the social nature of participation now. Daily social participation where you just don't see people at meets. You see them every day on Instagram, and you're constantly talking to other lifters and watching their videos and going, "Oh shit, they're way stronger than me." And so I think that drives some of it. I think that there's kind of as a result of that, a drive towards immediate gratification. And then I think that powerlifting is probably, we talk about field sports and real sports versus stopwatch sports. And I think that powerlifting is probably the ultimate stopwatch sport, where the training in terms of what you do, where you are, and the activity is the exact same as the sport. in the sense that if you're training for football, you're running and you're jumping and you're throwing and you're drilling and you're watching film, and there's all of these super diverse activities that go into making a complete football player. Whereas, if you're a sprinter, you're lifting and you're running. And if you're a lifter, you're just lifting. So, I think that people get confused about the nature of, the means that they're engaging in, whether they're general or specific. And I think you see this a lot with people that are trying to get into strength conditioning for, more traditional sports. If they come from a powerlifting background, they have a lot of trouble really inculcating that idea that lifting is not all there is, because in powerlifting, it is all there is. If that makes sense?
Yeah, it's a good point. It's kind of drawing that line between like something where lifting is the sport and lifting benefits the sport, or lifting kind of like bolsters up the ability to perform within your sport.
Yeah, and so in most sports, lifting is just GPP, and in powerlifting, lifting is GPP when performed a certain way, and it's also the SPP, your specific physical preparation. So people, I think, get hung up on truly delineating that because it's all just lifting weights, right?
Yeah. One other thing that you mentioned there that I thought was interesting was the need for like variety to be implemented into the long-term athletic development. And when you say variety, do you mean variety moving from phase to phase, so potentiating from one phase to the next? Do you mean variety in exercises, rep ranges, percentages? When you talk about variety, and then Mike can kind of comment on maybe how he's implemented this in this training, but what do you actually, don't give away all your programming secrets, obviously, the magic, but what do you mean when you say variety?
Well, when you talk about LTAD, that you can look at a long-term athletic development model, and then I think another paradigm that fits the acronym is the lifetime athletic development model. And I think that's maybe more appropriate for the discussion because we're not really talking about potentiating from mesocycle to mesocycle with this. We're talking about macro cycles stacked upon quadrennials and years, really starting from the point at which someone first starts to develop the kinesthetic awareness and the motor abilities when we had an early age when those things are still pretty plastic. And you see people who played a lot of sports and were good athletes, small kids, generally become good athletes as adults. And you get someone who, like me, was just coming off the couch at 18. Our ceilings are lower, and so some of that is nature. There's a sizable genetic component, and then there's a big portion of it that's really are you developing that broad base of physical ability and physical potential at an early age. And so we talk about a lifetime athletic development model. That broad base of physical potential is where the variety comes in. Being able to run and jump and throw and do gymnastics probably doesn't get you much as a 25, 30-year-old powerlifter. But having done that stuff as a 7-year-old kid probably has knock-on cumulative effects that cascade throughout the athletic career. So it truly is a long lifetime model, not a what do we do this month, what do we do next month. It doesn't fit an Excel spreadsheet very well.
Yeah, and then Mike, on the practical side of things, where do you see like variety in your training? Like, yes, you're training towards 3 specific lifts, but what are some kind of practical variations that you can leave the people with, like outside of just, hey, we're going to take heavy singles on squat, bench, and deadlift?
So are you talking in terms of like like intensity or like variations of like exercises? Or
Sure, it can be either.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I would say that there's a quite a bit of variety that one can apply, and for the most part, as long as it probably closely resembles like a squat, bench, or deadlift, it's going to be like reasonably specific to it. That's not to say that you can just go rando every single time you're at the gym or whatever. But I do think it's like fine to say, like I don't know, Thomas always has me doing some variant that I just get like really strong at over the course of a couple of blocks, and then we switch it up to something else that I suck really bad at, and then I get really strong at it, and then eventually I'll do my like more specific stuff, and I so far have been better for it. So I mean, we're not just doing heavy singles of our squat, bench, and deadlift year round. We're spacing it out with a lot of like beltless and tempo stuff with like I'm doing like front squats and high bar, etc. for my low bar squat, higher volumes. So you kind of apply that same principle to every other lift, and that's more or less how we've approached it so far with my own training, and how I would probably program for most athletes, honestly, just to keep things mentally and physically kind of fresh.
And yeah, and specifically speaking to Mike's training, one thing that I try to emphasize with everybody that I work with is that when we're talking about general development for lifting, which in the hierarchy of this LTAD model is above the tiers that we talked about earlier. You're in somewhere a gray area between general preparation and specific preparation. A lot of the emphasis, and Mike can attest to this, especially in the way I set up my microcycles. Can you guys hear my dog losing his mind?
Should I call it remote control or something?
I had the door closed and the other dog open.
No.
So a lot of the emphasis, though, is on building resilience in the body's structures. And so Mike has been absolutely crushing. For us, it's good mornings. And Mike's a sumo puller and a fairly wide stance low bar back squatter. So if you're talking about through the narrow lens of specificity, it's a useless movement for him because he doesn't do anything with his feet 12 inches apart and bending super forward at the hips. But he's been crushing those, and his other lifts, his indicators, which we'll hit heavy specific stuff later on, and we got some questions later on. I think that we can double back to this on with heavy specific stuff fairly frequently still during these general phases, and he's paying dividends. Even as a guy who's fairly advanced, has won some best lifters at meets and put in some pretty good time already in the sport. That general development that doesn't necessarily fit the specific lens of do hinge with the stance that you pull and squat with the stance that you squat and whatnot. Exposing the body to various joint angles and various disadvantaged positions. Powerlifting is about efficiency. Training for powerlifting is about eliminating inefficiencies, make the weak link strong.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, when you say variety in powerlifting training, they're thinking of, and this kind of goes with our Fight Me Friday from 2 weeks ago, the sets and reps aren't periodization. And so this next question kind of goes with that in terms of incorporating variety in your training. And Ryan Patterson asks, is the difference in adaptation from 1 to 10 reps as different as some people would suggest? So the classic like NSCA, CSCS textbook of like 1 rep, absolute strength, 2 to 6, basic strength or power, 8 to 12, hypertrophy. Is the adaptation that different within the rep range? Is there kind of a mix of adaptations that you get? Thomas, you might have something interesting to put in here with your one set of 20.
No. That's the answer. The answer is no. It's not different. Not that different.
Mike, would you care to follow up on or expand on that great answer there?
So, I mean, from what I understand, at least, and y'all can feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is that, and I would agree that no, they're not that different, but that the adaptations may stem from different mechanisms. Is that fair to say? Or is that?
So I
correct me if I'm wrong.
I think there's a tendency to really simplify and bucketize how the body responds to a stimulus. And so, and we had this discussion, I know, in a group chat a while back about people saying about what the effective reps conversation, and how if you simplify any concept enough, you can put it in neat little buckets, like 2 reps for strength, 4 reps for whatever. And, it's not really how it works. Everything that we do exists on a spectrum. And so if you think in the grand spectrum of human movement and how we provide energy for our muscles to contract and relax, and how our nervous system activates those muscles, all of this stuff happens across a much, much greater time frame than anybody is lifting weights for. And so the real differences, I think, are on the extreme ends of the spectrum when you start to talk about truly explosive speed or strength, strength actions like you might see in weightlifting. Maybe it matters more. Field sports where your ground contact time is less than 1/10 of a second. Things like that, it matters. Powerlifting, a set of 3 versus a set of 10. And I did a little legwork up from this, and just for hypotheticals, so if you're easy bucketizing, you're saying a set of 3 at an RPE of about 8 would be your classic strength work, right? Set of 3 at 80 to 85%. That would be if you were to, feed a computer powerlifting programs and tell it to give you a strength workout. That's what the algorithm would return, right? The AI. So, and then if you were to do bodybuilding work, which is, say set of 10 and 8, kind of be your classic bodybuilding set. We'll say it's back squat, same deal. That's what the AI is going to give you if you ask for that stimulus after feeding it 100,000 strength and bodybuilding programs. So your actual velocity at a set of 3 at 8 is somewhere in the order of 0.4 meters per second. Your average velocity with a set of 10 at 8 is somewhere on the order of 0.54 meters per second. So there's not a huge difference. We're talking 0.14 meters per second. That's not huge in this context. So the real differences between the set of 3 at 8 and the set of 10 at 8 is load and volume. And you're at that point, you're not talking about periodization in terms of athletic capacities being developed. You're talking about programming. You're talking about load and volume. And it's, then it's more a matter of practical terms than anything else. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
Yeah, I like that.
So Thomas and I have talked recently a little bit about Dr. Yesus and his 1 set of 20 program. And Dr. Yesus comes from that kind of old Russian periodization line of thinking with the Verkhoshanskys and the Bumpas of the world. And Thomas, maybe you can talk a little bit more about how the implication of a program like that would work. Because if you handed a power lifter or an Olympic weightlifter something that was 1 set of 20 on squats, they might call you fucking insane. But why is that not insane?
Well, and I'll preface this, I'm by far not an expert on Dr. Yesus's work or the 1 with 20 program. It's something I've been playing with lately. I find it really interesting. It's kind of a paradigm shift from what you see in most conventional powerlifting and strength training programs, and it's it kind of meshes with a lot of thoughts that I've had for a while, things I've been kicking around, on a theoretical level. But the idea is that, and we've had these discussions as it relates to bodybuilding, that there's effectiveness of reps exists on a spectrum, and there's not really a truly ineffective rep and a truly effective rep. And then the argument that you would get from Dr. Yesus is that those last 4 to 5 reps in a set of 20 are tapping into high threshold motor units as the weaker fibers fatigue and drop out. So the idea is to get a stimulus. This applies more to sports where lifting is not the main focus, and being in the weight room is something you want to effectively minimize. You have limited time to train athletes. You will spend, it would be as efficient as possible with all of that time. So the 1 set of 20 approach indicates or prescribes that the last 5 reps are very effective. They develop the the limit strength, strength, speed, whatever attribute you want to call out there, and does it again in an efficient way. So I've lost my train of thought. I started rambling.
That's what we love you for.
Yeah. So put back on track.
From what I read from the article that you sent me about the 1x20 was that you're getting a spectrum of adaptations within a single set. So therefore you're not having to run multiple sets with high absolute loads, incurring a large amount of fatigue that'll essentially take away from your performance when you step out on the field.
See, look, this guy knows it better than me already.
Yeah, see, you just give me an article, I'll sum it up, I'll put it in Twitter version. That's what I'm here for.
I like it.
I'm here to moderate. All right, so let's shift gears a little bit away from the program design, long-term athlete development, and kind of like an area where I have some good knowledge in terms of the sports nutrition side, but I want to hear your guys' perspective on this in terms of cutting weight. So cutting weight in powerlifting. Maybe how is it currently done? Why that might be a bad idea? Is it similar to how MMA fighters and wrestlers do it? What do you guys see most often in the field? And we'll start with Mike. What do you see from powerlifters most when it comes to cutting weight?
So my only experience with cutting weight, and I've never actually needed to. I've only done it because I was small. I weighed a little over 198 and thought it would be cool for me to be 198 instead of 220 at the time and barely totaling 1,000 pounds. So I cut weight doing it then for the USAPL 2-hour weigh-in. So I don't have a ton of personal experience with it, but from what I understand, other higher level athletes who do cut weight choose to do is a lot of water loading. So the week of definitely upping their water intake. I've heard some sodium manipulation too. What I used I don't even know if it's still out there, but Matt Gary with SSPT had an article on their website it was probably the early 2000s on cutting weight for powerlifting. I just followed that protocol when I did, and I definitely peed out 5 or 6 pounds really easily. It wasn't hard at all. But that's the only experience I have with it. I've never done it in any sort of higher stakes or really any need to do it sort of situation. So I'd be interested to hear if Thomas has any more, experience with it.
So I think kind of going back to how we talked about lifters in 2020 and how there's a lot of people that maybe take in information that's not truly applicable to where they are in their developmental arc and try to replicate that. I think that a lot of the emphasis and focus on cutting weight is maybe misguided and premature. I think if you're there's obviously a concern. We talk about cutting weight. There's two sides to this. There's the optimizing body composition, and then there's the water manipulation part. I think that optimizing body composition is something that can be done and can be effective as long as it's not taken to extremes. You see guys that kill themselves because they're trying to stay under 10% body fat and compete, and that's just not where they are naturally. I mean, there's some guys that stay lean no matter what, and that's great for them. But if that's not who you are, if you're somebody who maybe like me grew up on the chunkier side,
Chunky boys,
if your personal wiring is not set up to maintain that kind of body composition and support real hard training, then you're probably selling yourself short by constantly dieting. On the other hand, I don't think anybody's really got an argument for going full, we'll call it full 2008
dreamer.
Everybody was reading Elite FTS and eating cheeseburgers at every meal, and I'm going to be a super heavyweight no matter what. I don't think there's really any excuse for that from a competitive standpoint to just become immovably sloppy. So there's a balance there, and I think it comes down to I know we had a conversation the other week about how most powerlifters I think just need to learn to eat like adults, and then that's a gross oversimplification for a lot of people, but really it's true. Just be responsible with your intake. and stay within the lines. Don't get too far on any one direction. And
Yeah,
now,
not getting overly lean is a pretty good point, especially if or not trying to stay overly lean, especially if you're trying to progress your lifts in the off season. Progressing your lifts in the off season is going to require you to actually gain some weight along the way, especially if you're later on in your career. And I think a lot of powerlifters really get married to a single weight class. They're a 198er or they're a 220er, and they'll fly in the face of that until the end of the world, just trying to stay in that one weight class, not realizing that they could easily be more competitive, increase their wilks, hit much bigger lifts if they were to just allow themselves to grow into that next weight class.
yeah, I think I would counter with that I don't think it's even. I think it's more necessary for younger lifters to accept gaining weight than more advanced lifters. I think that you see this crisis of intermediates, like you said, where people get married to the idea of this weight class as part of my identity as an athlete. Um, and I've worked with a number of guys who have really just been stuck for years on end and kind of spinning their wheels and wasting time from their competitive window. Um, and it's because they've been married to staying at 181 or 198. Those seem to be the big two that people get hung up on. 65 to a degree, but 181 and 198. I think those are just comfortable weights for a lot of people aesthetically. And they want to stay there. And really what that does is it sort of creates a limit as your total approaches. It's asymptotic. And, if you were to take the plot, the average totals in the top, say the top 100, as it relates to weight class, you'd probably see the distributions, the 181s as they approach a certain limit are going to grow infinitely closer, but never cross that line, with the exception of some rare freak like Belev or something. And then the same with the 198s and the 220s and so forth. And if you're an average lifter, the probability that you're going to be the guy who breaks through that asymptotic curve and moves the average up is pretty low, So the best thing you could do is give yourself the best chance for success. And there's a positive correlation with body mass and total. That's the third rule of powerlifting, probably the second. It's along with no one cares what you bench press. But
You heard it here first from Thomas Butler. Weight moves weight. Get your beef on. Look at Mike's shirt. It says it all. Oh,
look at the beef. Look at all the beef.
Flex in there too.
Yeah.
So some takeaways there in terms of cutting weight and power.
Jaw. You can't look at the jaw and the neck on that thing and say weight doesn't move weight, because it's even sprouted the mustache.
Look at this guy. Look at this
guy.
All right, so some big takeaways in terms of cutting weight for powerlifting might be that if you're early on in your career, don't worry too much about cutting weight unless you are like right on that edge. Like if you're 198.5 and you want to do a small cut to get yourself down under 198 to compete there, that's fine. But don't go full Dan Green and try and cut 30, 40, 50 pounds leading into a meet. There are going to be a very large percentage of the times where that goes very poorly, and then maybe there's one or two times where you somehow squeak out a performance that resembles your best ever. So not something to really worry about that. In terms of the water cutting side, which is more of what the MMA fighters do, set yourself up for a reasonable water cut somewhere between 2 to 5% of your body weight in water is reasonable. 5% is really pushing it. I like to see closer to 3, but anything outside of that you're trying to completely pull off in just water, you're getting IVs afterward, you're ballooning yourself back up with Diet Coke and IHOP directly after weigh-ins. Those large fluctuations, they might look good on your Instagram story, or they might look funny on Instagram story. It makes a good meme, but at the end of the day, it's not going to do much for performance. Agreed?
Yeah, well, and especially with that, I think the further you get away from that 2 to 3% of your body mass that you're trying to cut, I think it's justifiable if you're close. And like Mike said, if you're 199 trying to make 198, that's reasonable. That's not a big deal. Even like 202 or something like that. trying to sneak into a lower weight class. But if you're cutting big amounts of weight, you better have a good reason. You better be winning money, setting world records, doing something. Don't do it for a plastic trophy at the YMCA. You know, I don't know if you guys ever seen was it Bigger, Faster, Stronger, the Mark Bell movie? The guy that lives in his van at Venice, and he's like 63 years old, and he's still chasing the dream. That's the guy who's cutting 25 pounds to take third in the 220s at his local YMCA. Don't be that guy.
Extremely normal behavior.
Yeah,
very normal, well-adjusted behavior.
A good movie too. All right, so the next question is one that we do get quite a bit, and it's one that grinds some gears here, and it comes from Mike Landau. And the question is, and it's just a nice and simple one: linear periodization versus daily undulating periodization. In the right corner wearing the blue trunks, we've got linear periodization, weighing in at very old, always works. And in the right corner in the red trunks, coming from Dr. Mike Zordos, we've got daily undulating periodization. And Mike, who wins? What's the tail to take?
Oh man, oh Lord. I'm gonna like Thomas's answer better because it's probably more thoughtful. It probably depends on your setup, and also I would say like they probably both kind of incorporate a little bit of each other. Is probably something that's going to be said a little bit here, but I'm obviously a Zordos boy, so yeah.
I'm gonna throw this out there before someone else says it. They're not mutually exclusive. Now, Thomas,
correct.
what would you like to say?
That's thank you. That's what I was trying to get at.
So I'm going to reject the entire premise of the question. Okay. So the idea, first we need to define periodization to understand this. Periodization is the planning for the development of diverse physical and motor abilities across the career of the athlete. Periodization is not sets and reps. Going back to the set of 1 to 10 question, if you're lifting weights, you're lifting weights. It's not really lifting a set of 2 and then lifting a set of 8 is not periodizing. It's programming. It's managing load, volume, stress, intensity. Periodization is the development of physical attributes in a way that maximizes the efficiency from a recovery and time standpoint for the athlete, and also maximizes the transfer of the training that creates those attributes as it relates to the sporting performance or the sport form. Programming is sets, reps, volume, load, intensity. So when people talk about linear periodization, they think they're talking about what we refer to as Western periodization. And if you stay within the scope of powerlifting, it could be depending on the specifics. But linear Western periodization dictates that there is a aerobic development phase and a hypertrophic development phase and a strength development phase and a power development phase. And those things were really conceived with the idea that those would be distinct activities, not lifting weights for aerobic development, lifting weights for hypertrophic development, lifting weights for strength development, lifting weights for power development. You know, it was really conceived in the sense that you would be running or you would be doing some sort of aerobic conditioning, and then you would go spend some time not doing aerobic conditioning and building muscular tissue. And then you would spend some time not working on hypertrophy, but really developing maximal strength. And then you take and walk away from all of that and develop speed and power through means like jumping and throwing. And then you would try to realize your sport form with that. And that's when people take on linear periodization and try to knock it down, it's really like talking about, the 1972 Oldsmobile is not fuel efficient. Well, no one gives a shit. It's 45, 50 years old. No one does that anymore anyways. So it's kind of a straw man in a lot of these discussions. And you get a lot of really big brain personal trainer types that think that they've got this sea change because they read the West Side Book of Methods once. So daily undulating, I take a pretty big issue with this in the sense that it's not really periodization in that sense. It's programming. Mike can speak more to the specifics of what daily undulating periodization is in the specifically what the program looks like. But it's say Monday you squat a 3x3, and on Wednesday you hit singles at a lower intensity than the 3x3, and on Friday you hit a 5 rep max, for instance. And obviously the program changes throughout the year and varies, but the fundamental idea is that you're experiencing the same needs. You're using the same movement, same tools at various intensities and volumes to accomplish slightly different attributes, to create slightly different attributes. But since all of this exists in the spectrum, resistance training, if you're squatting for power, you're mostly squatting with a sprinkle of power training in it. If you're squatting for hypertrophy, you're getting hypertrophy, but you're also getting power, and you're also getting strength as it relates specifically to squatting. And if you're squatting for strength, you're still developing some degree of power. And I don't think anyone would argue that you couldn't get big, strong thighs just doing heavy sets of 5 once a week. I mean, there's a whole school of weightlifters that have done nothing but that. And, so the real nuance is in you're not diversifying your means, and you're not really developing fully distinct biomotor capacities by doing so. So I would say that it's a misnomer to begin with to refer to daily undulating periodization as it's practiced by powerlifters as periodization. It's programming. That's not to say it's an invalid concept, but I think it's improperly named, and I think that hangs a lot of people up, again, because of the confusion that people have translating sports science concepts that exist in arenas that are much bigger than the weight room to sports that exist only in the weight room.
Yeah, to be fair, I don't want to bastardize Zordos here. I have heard Zordos on a podcast say, when someone said, "Oh, daily undulating periodization," he said, "Oh, no, it's not really periodization, it's just programming."
Yeah.
So I am in no way saying here that I think that Zordos genuinely believes that daily undulations in percentages, bar velocity, repetitions, anything like that is actually periodization.
Yeah, well, and I think that thing is probably one of those things where the internet got a hold of it and ran away with it.
Yes. Oh yeah.
And it's not sad because, and I use a form of undulation with my lifters. Mike's undulating his program right now, because I don't think that there's a whole lot to be gained. And this is probably a Fight Me Friday topic, that phase potentiation for lifting weights is probably not a super important thing. I think that you get into the idea of the stimulus response model versus the super compensation model, and why not, if things don't interfere, why not get better at everything?
Yeah, so the interfere. I'm glad you actually said that, because I think, and you can agree with me, disagree with me here, but I think people overstate the interference effect in training. They seem to think that, if I do something as simple as like a couple minutes of cardio, that it's going to take away, that it's going to interfere with my strength work, or if that I do a set of 10 on Monday, that I'll lose my ability to do singles on Friday. Is that something that you see, or am I memeing myself?
No, I think that's totally true. And you've seen it with your training, right? With the CrossFit stuff we're doing. If you structure your program according to sound principles, consolidate your stresses, don't try to do hard things immediately after other hard things, allow yourself proper recovery, getting into some basic fundamental aspects of program design, interference effect is pretty minimal. Now, if you write a bad program, you have to worry about the interference effect. If you don't write bad programs, you don't really have problems with it.
What if I'm a power builder? That's what the people want to know. Can I be a power builder?
You mean someone who lifts weights?
I'm going to do heavy singles on squat, and then I'm going to get into 10 sets of 30 on leg press.
Sounds good.
Will I get jacked? I'll get jacked. Done deal. All right. Don't fill out my true coach this week, Thomas. I've got my program. I'm ready to go. All right. So one more question here. Let's see if we can pick an easy one. I'm going to throw this at you, and you're going to throw one answer back at me. Thomas, no ranting here. Control yourself. Deep breathing.
I think we can probably get through the rest of these pretty quick if you want to hit them like a minute or less.
Biggest training mistake that you observe lifters who program for themselves making, and I'll throw it to Mike first. Mike, what is the biggest training mistake that you observe lifters who program for themselves making?
Well, the biggest programming mistake that I make for myself is believing that I am somehow an anomaly in that like I can simultaneously handle way more volume and intensity than other people, but also can like take a week off of training when life gets rough and just pick back up like normal, unlike other people. Like it's just fine because it's me. I can just do that. So thinking that I'm an anomaly, that's probably the biggest error that I see, so the self-programmers make, and which is why I'm done with that. It sucks. It's a quick way to get nowhere.
You stole mine.
You better be more creative next time.
I'm going to try. All right, Thomas, what do you got? Biggest training mistake you observe lifters who program for themselves making?
I think that people get into the start from the assumption that rather than identifying where they need the most work, they assume that everything needs work and they want to jam everything into the program at one time. They want to improve everything at the same time. Not to say you can't do that, but rather than taking a real assessment of what they need to do to get better, day 1 to day 2 to day 3, they assume that we'll do everything at once. They bite off more than they can chew. And they usually end up burnt out, tired, and looking for another program in 2 or 3 months. Even as far as training frequency, volume, what they can handle, people aren't tactical with how they prescribe those things for themselves. They try to do everything.
That's another good one. I was going to say that one too. All right. Mine is going to have to be people who tend to catastrophize the bad days and then glorify the good days too much. So they go in, they're a little fatigued, they're having a bad day, everything is shit. I need to take a 2-week deload. I need to take time off from the gym. Something must be terribly wrong. Or the days where they go in and everything is moving really well. And it's like, well, God is just telling me that today is the day that I have to max out. So it's people who get too caught up in the acute and how I feel today without respect for how they're going to feel a week from now, 2 weeks from now, or 3 weeks from now. Remember that we're building up to something throughout the program. It's not just that single day of going as hard as you can.
At me next time, man. That's me.
You're
all me, actually.
What's up?
You want to hit the rest of these real quick, Ryan?
Yeah, sure. What we got next here? Let's go with all right, Mike Taylor, a question from ours truly. Why do we even powerlift? Well, that's an easy one for me. I don't. I tried it once. Yeah. My back got all broke to did, and now I'm done. Mike, why do you powerlift?
Oh Lord. Because it's not because it's fun. It's I don't know, pass. I like being stronger than other people, straight up.
Did you powerlift?
Can we get Lenny to throw the hard to swallow pills meme in on that?
So Thomas, so when you were powerlifting, what was your driving force? What kept you coming back for more?
Probably I was a insecure 22-year-old, and it was fun, and it gave me kind of an outlet for being grumpy about stuff. I didn't think about it very much back then. I just went and did it, and I thought I was cool. And
you weren't.
I wasn't. I was not. I was actually running full speed in the opposite direction. Come to look back at it. So.
Can we get a disclaimer here? People who think that powerlifting will make them cool, or people who think that powerlifting is a personality, yay, nay, or absolutely nay? That's an absolutely nay.
Yeah. It's a hard nay.
Yeah,
hard-
your
hard
1RM deadlift that you slammed on the ground at the LA Fitness, and those employees who just keep giving you shit because you're a freak beast. You're just an insufferable POS. So let's take it easy there.
Think about the ladies at the office who can't stop talking about their keto diet
That's you.
or their Weight Watchers diet. You
That-
are them. They are you. That's what you are. So don't be that person.
Yes, exactly. All right, so up next, we've got any preferred methods for building work capacity for powerlifters. So, Thomas, best way, or maybe a couple little tidbits here on the best ways to build work capacity for powerlifters.
I mean, to keep it short, there's specific work capacity and there's general work capacity, as it relates to powerlifting. Generally, probably try to move your body every day, go for walks, go jog, swim. It's not going to kill you. You're not going to lose your gains. Don't take it to extremes, but move, make the blood move. And generally, I think that developing spending some time with higher reps movements that you're not used to, motor patterns that are maybe a little more diverse, movements that are difficult or disadvantaged, sets you up for better resilience when it comes to the specific.
And as far as proximity from competition, where do you like to put that work capacity stuff?
I like to keep some work capacity going to some degree. I'm a big concurrent guy. I've kind of shifted away from the real strictly delineated blocks. Some degree of work capacity happens all the time, except for when we're really just trying to minimize fatigue at every expense. Like right before a competition, or we're driving to a peak, we'll maybe drop that out. The residuals on aerobic development are like 30 to 40 days. So the last 3 or 4 weeks before meet, it'll really taper down. But that's about it. I like to keep it going. Keeps people healthy. Keeps them feeling good.
Next one I'm going to throw out to Mike, our doctor. The next one is going to be about unilateral work carryover. So your unilateral work, how well does it carry over to competition-specific lifts? Is this something that we implement in the off season, or do we take those unilateral lifts, load them up heavy, and keep them in as we get closer to competition? What do you think is best practice there?
Oh man, I mean, as with everything, it probably depends, right? I think probably different exercises are going to carry over to the comp lifts depending on the individual and their like specific like morphology for one, like how they squat or deadlift, or I'm assuming this is in the context of lower body work. There's not a lot of unilateral upper body stuff. I mean, I guess dumbbells, whatever. Stupid idiot. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know necessarily like what the carryover is. I think they're a good exercise to do because they're different, a little bit of variety, right? You're generally not having a barbell on your back the whole time. So that's also a kind of nice change. Feels good. And then I like them personally for more hypertrophy, although I don't know if I would necessarily say it has to be an off-season thing. You could run with some unilateral work up to pretty close to, your meet or whatever your strength testing event is. And I don't think it would necessarily harm it as long as it's, as with everything, considered in the grand scheme of things as your program. I also wouldn't necessarily say that they prevent injuries too. So, they can be helpful maybe if there is like a severe, deficit on one side, specifically addressing it could be helpful. I don't think that they necessarily are preventative entirely, though.
So I agree with Mike. I think that falls back in the category like the previous question about work capacity and developing resilience through training. I think that unilateral movements are just a tool that can be used as a part of a greater scheme. They're not preventative, like he said, except to the extent that they develop resilience to movement, make the body stronger.
Yeah, I also don't think that we should throw them out there kind of like as a blanket. Kind of take it at lifter by lifter. So if you've got a lifter who comes out of the hole in a squat and they've got a horrendous hip shift to one side or the other, like Mike said, they've got a glaring deficit on one side, or maybe they catch a snatch and they do like the helicopter thing where they slowly just rotate at the bottom of a snatch. In that scenario, there's obviously a deficit on one side or the other, so some unilateral work maybe thrown in, and proximity to competition needs to be considered as well. But yeah, some good points there. One thing that I did want to leave the people with is going to be how to cook a great dinner. So for dinner, we are going to have a nice steak, and Thomas is going to teach us how to cook a nice steak. Mike is going to teach us how to roast some good veggies. And I am going to give everyone my famous polenta chip recipe. So, Thomas, start us off. How to cook a great steak.
So what you're going to do is you're going to want to get probably a 1.5 to 2 inch thick chunk of cow. I prefer strip or ribeye. Um, you're going to want to take that, uh, salt it immediately prior to placing it on a wire rack baking sheet in a 200 to 250 degree oven for maybe 25 minutes. Check it with a thermometer. If you have a remote one, that is great. You want to get it to roughly 120 degrees internal temperature. Take it out at that point. Place it to the side. Tent it with foil. Get your cast iron skillet out, place it on the stove, and get you about 3 or 4 tablespoons of butter in that bad boy, and get it bubbling hot. Okay, so it's probably medium high heat. At this point, your steak is rested. Take it, place it in the butter. Get you a basting brush. Silicone basting brushes are great, but you could use a spoon if you're really roughing it. And just kick that butter up over the steak continuously. Turn it about every 90 seconds to 2 minutes, and probably want to give it 2 exposures per side. You should have a nice deep brown crust on that bad boy. Keeping the butter moving constantly will help it cook evenly, and also keep the butter itself from burning, which is not a pleasant thing. Take it out, give it 2 or 3 minutes to calm down, and then cut it maybe half-inch slices against the grain, and you'll be happy.
So you've got your delicious protein. Now you're going to want to set that up with a nice grain, a nice carbohydrate source. I recommend a nice polenta. So get your nice polenta mix. You want it extra thick. We're talking 4 C's on that bad boy, which you're going to cook that up, get it nice and thick. You're going to put it in a brownie tin, not too thick. So we're talking about maybe an inch. Depending on who's measuring, an inch high, get a nice layer, cool that in the refrigerator. Once it's cooled, it's set, it's gonna be nice and congealed. You're gonna slice it up as if it was fries. And then if you've got an air fryer, you're gonna throw it in that bad boy. If not, an oven on 420, blaze it, the only temperature to bake things in. Throw that bad boy in the oven, get some spray on it until it's nice and crispy, and you've got yourself some delicious polenta fries. Mike, are you gonna hit us up with some veggies here? What's our next little side dish? Maybe a dessert.
Okay. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go to the grocery store first. Okay. But on the way to the grocery store, you're going to stop by a florist. You're going to pick up some flowers. Then you're going to make a CD, a mixtape. I could help you with it if you get with me offline with some of my wife's favorite songs on them. You're going to approach her as a friend at first. You're going to, have flowers for her. And basically you need to pull my wife away from me. You need to gain her trust somehow, convince her to leave me, take the kids, take the house, everything. Because I'm so trash in the kitchen. I cannot do shit. I'm so bad. So basically, I would say Dairy Queen, I guess. I could hook you up with some of that.
You had me the first time, Mike, not gonna lie.
Yeah. Oh man. I was really nervous at first. I was trying to think of a recipe, and then I was like, no, okay.
Not needed. You gave the people what they wanted. It started out as a dinner recipe. It ended as how to lure someone's wife away from them. A recipe for adultery. And that's content that you can't really get anywhere else. So with that, we're going to conclude today's episode of the Powerlifting Q&A. Thank you for coming out. Thank you for watching. As always, if you support what we do, head on over to giftedperformance.com, sign up, get your first 2 weeks free, 15 very highly customized programs. Check out the coaches tab, check out the storefront, everything we have to offer there. We are going to leave you with that. And as always, guys, stay gifted. Bye, people. Look at that, man.